Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Melissa Graves. She is an associate professor and department chair in the Department of Intelligence and Security Studies at the Citadel Military College of South Carolina. She researches issues related to national security, including the U.S. president's relationship to the intelligence community. She teaches a variety of courses on intelligence history, analysis, and legal issues. Her book, Nixon's FBI, Hoover, Watergate, and a Bureau in Crisis, evaluates the complex and oftentimes fraught relationships between the president, attorney general, and FBI director. Dr. Graves has published articles in Foreign Policy, the International Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, Cambridge Review of International Affairs, IALEIA Journal of Intelligence Analysis, Social Science Quarterly, and Security Journal. She is also the co-author of Introduction to Intelligence Studies, 3rd edition, and she received her Ph.D. in History and Juris Doctor from the University of Mississippi. So thank you so much and welcome to Tipping Spears, Dr. Graves.
Thank you so much for having me here, Hannah. It's a pleasure.
Well, can you tell us kind of where your story begins? What kind of sparked your interest in this fascinating sector of intelligence and national security?
Absolutely. So I am one of those people that ended up where I am completely on accident, and I'm actually super grateful that I ended up where I am because I love what I'm doing. But I interact with students a lot in my job. Um, and I really kind of have a heart for students who are in their college years, but trying to figure out what they want to do, because that was very much me. As a college student, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. I thought I wanted to, be in the courtroom doing trials. And I went to law school, and I realized, like, almost on day one, maybe even orientation, that I really didn't like it. But it was too late. I had already moved halfway across the country. And so I tried to make the best of it, tried to become an attorney, and, make it through law school. And I had about 3 years during that time when I was in law school where, what I was doing was really not in any way, like, it didn't feel like I'd really found my place. And so I took a position with the DC Attorney General's office after I finished law school. I was working in a temporary position, was up in DC, enjoyed what I was doing, loved the people that I was working with, but again, didn't really love the legal field. I ended up back in Mississippi because I hit the legal job market right as the 2008 recession began, which, like, decimated a lot of legal jobs. And in particular, the DC government froze hiring at that time. So what was, a temporary job that I hoped would become permanent didn't. So I found myself back in Oxford, Mississippi, where I'd gone to law school. And I was like, really kind of in this desperate spot where I'm just like applying for any and everything. And I was applying for jobs at the University of Mississippi and didn't even realize that I was applying for a job with what would become the Center for Intelligence and Security Studies. They didn't advertise it as such. It was just this very generic project coordinator position with a vague center as part of one of the schools. And I still remember, getting the call to interview, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. Because I had taken some classes on national security law, and international law, and had kind of focused on terrorism, things like that in law school. So it aligned with a lot of my interests. And I was lucky enough to be offered that job. And I thought, okay, this is so great because I can, use the next 6 months or a year to kind of get back on my feet. The economy will get better and I'll go out and I'll, truly practice law. But what ended up happening is I finally found a way to work and be doing something that I loved. And so I loved working with students. I loved interfacing with the intelligence community. Um, and very quickly I realized, you know what? I don't think I'm ever going to go back to trying to practice law the way that I had initially envisioned it. Um, just because I really loved the work that I was doing with the intelligence community. And a lot of what we were doing in those early years, um, 2008 was when I was hired. And so we're like 7 years removed from 9/11. And that was very much in Congress's mind at the time. And so they had passed a congressional appropriation to fund a center at the University of Mississippi. And this was kind of trending around the nation
Mhm.
at the time, where, the 9/11 Commission had released its report. And one of the things that it had identified as a huge deficiency leading to 9/11 was um, a lack of creativity and an inability to analyze. And so that was our mission at the University of Mississippi, was to identify the best and the brightest students from throughout the campus and supplement their major in whatever it was, whether it was a foreign language or a STEM field, with a minor in intelligence analysis. And so I very quickly just really I loved what we were doing, because in so many different ways it was immediately impacting lives. I mean, it was really, really fun, to take students to Washington, D.C. for the first time. And sometimes, I'd have a student who had never flown on a plane before, and they're going to Washington, D.C. And that was just like, that was such a cool opportunity to be able to take students to that world. And just also kind of knowing, that the work that we're doing, that the students that we're helping to develop, that they're going to ultimately go into the intelligence community and make a difference. And now, years on down the road, I see that because I have students who are employed throughout the intelligence community. And for me, that is the most rewarding part of this job, is just getting to be, you know a tiny part of that journey, but seeing students who have all the right skill sets and all the right values, and helping kind of, shepherd them towards a career in intelligence is hugely fulfilling. And that's ultimately kind of how I have ended up doing what I'm doing, but also why I've stayed with it.
Oh, fascinating. It's so interesting to hear how you've been able to really, will open doors and kind of show folks these opportunities and intelligence that they don't even know exist. I know when I was, 22 and I'm not sure what I wanted to do, I didn't even know what national security was. I mean, I'm from the middle of nowhere in Mississippi, like one of those kids who had never flown on a plane before. So it's like no concept of like what it is and then how you would get involved in it. And I love your emphasis on kind of that cross sector, or the value of, kind of backgrounds, whether it's in foreign language or, providing that creativity that's needed to address kind of the intelligence related challenges we face today.
Yeah, I think what you said about like kind of being from nowhere, Mississippi, that was something that I noticed among a lot of students, is just, and they didn't even have to be from the middle of nowhere. I mean, sometimes they were coming from major cities, but I think a lot of students just never consider like, I could actually go into intelligence. They've
Yeah.
seen the television shows, they've seen the movies, And they have no idea how you would actually break
Right.
into that world. So to, be able to make it accessible to people
Mhm.
was for me fascinating. And during, that time, especially at University of Mississippi, I was regularly interfacing with all of the different intelligence agencies, whether
Mhm.
through visits up there with students
Mhm.
or we were, working on projects. But I learned a lot during that time about, just how they work, how they function,
Mhm.
made a lot of contacts, particularly in the analytic community.
Mhm.
We were fortunate enough in those early years to be hosting what started as the Four Eyes Conference, and then it morphed to the Five Eyes Conference. And so we were hosting on campus analytic managers and trainers from the US, from Canada, from the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And so they were coming to campus and they were sharing with their fellow trainers or teachers how they were educating their workforce in analysis. And so to bring students into that and just to see the different international perspectives was really interesting. And I just, even today, like, it never gets old watching a student kind of light up when they realize, oh my gosh, like, this is a future and I actually could be really good at this.
That's great. So, can you tell us how your history background kind of inspires your work in kind of this critical field that people may think is like very, James Bond techie, or
Yeah,
so can you tell us kind of the importance of kind of that history piece?
sure, absolutely. um Yeah, it's funny because when I would start teaching like an intro to intelligence
Mhm.
class, one of the first conversations that we would have, maybe even like the very first lecture, was how is the real intelligence community different from James Bond,
Yeah.
right? Because for a lot of students, like, that's kind of their starting point.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that I have appreciated, and the skills that doing historical research, is that one, um, the intelligence community is so interesting. And so even though, we put disclaimers on it and we're like, it's not James Bond, it's still plenty interesting. And you just have to kind of look at the historical record and you can see that. But two, I think, one of the things that I've appreciated, being able to access different archives, whether that's a presidential library and I'm looking at White House records from, a particular administration, or maybe I'm looking at congressional records, or maybe I'm looking at an agency's declassified records, is that you put together all these puzzle pieces to tell the story. And what I appreciate about that is that, one, you don't know how many puzzle pieces there are, like
Mhm.
in the beginning, like, you don't know what you're going to find. And so there's a little bit of a treasure hunt aspect to it, which I like absolutely adore. For me, it's fun kind of hunting down these archival records. Um, but two, every piece that you find changes how you see the situation. Maybe not like enormously, maybe only a little bit, but each one of those records moves the needle of your understanding. And so one of the things that I'm working on right now is, I'm working on a book that is talking about a Nazi spy ring operating in the US during World War II out of Detroit, Michigan. This was a female led Nazi team that was looking at the car manufacturers, because what I think a lot of us forget about World War II is that um, corporations like Ford,
Mhm.
Chevrolet, GMC actually turned their factories into production lines for
Mhm.
war material. And so, in looking at that, I started with a very big FBI file.
Mhm.
And that felt like gold to open that up and see, oh my gosh, there are thousands of pages for this investigation. But then, after I had the chance to look at that, it was like, well, okay, but that's only the FBI's perspective. So, like, what other perspectives, what other voices can we bring into the mix? And where that ultimately led me was, can we actually trace back the records on these Nazi spies to their home countries? Like, can we take a Hungarian spy and actually see, like, what does Hungary have in its archive about this spy who begins this work? Um, and so trying to kind of chase the international tendrils kind of takes me from seeing only the FBI's perspective to
Mhm.
seeing, like, all right, this is where this person started. This was their
Mhm.
family, this was their home. Like, let's really understand, like, the steps that took them to the place where, they sign up or they agree to work for the Nazis as spies. So for me, I appreciate that, history gives you the skills to just understand that one record is more than likely not going to say the whole story. You want to get as many different pieces, understanding that each different type of, archival material that you get is going to come with its own bias. And so that's something that I've just found really interesting as a researcher and has helped me, I think, see a lot of these subjects, um, maybe in a less stereotypical way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't, like, obviously put these people up on a pedestal as
Mhm.
examples of what I want to be. But I also think that sometimes, especially when we're dealing with people in history who have done things that we wish they wouldn't have done, really trying to understand who they were as people becomes pretty fundamental, in the research process.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love the treasure hunt analogy. I never thought of it being like that, but that is so cool.
Like a treasure hunt for nerds.
A little Sherlock Holmes. You know?
Yeah, it's like that National Treasure movie, but
Yes.
without all the cool moments. It's just all in an archive, like, library setting. Like, no one wants to watch that, but it's still exciting when you're in it.
So was there a particular person or event that kind of served as a catalyst for your career?
Ah, um, I have to give a huge shout out to Dr. Carl Jensen. Carl is the person that initially hired me at University of Mississippi. And I tell him, like, we're good friends. I talk to him on a regular basis. And I've told him multiple times, like, you completely altered the trajectory of my life. Like, thank you so much for taking a chance on me. I don't know what you saw in me in 2008, but, like, your decision to hire me really did alter my entire life. And so he was the director of the Center for Intelligence and Security Studies at University of Mississippi. He had recently retired after a 22-year career as an FBI agent. And yeah, I think I was very lucky to work under someone like Carl because, he had done he's one of those people that just has done the work throughout his
Mhm.
entire life and, like, has done it for the right reasons and has really, like, kept a strong grasp of their values. So he
Mhm.
started at the Naval Academy, and served in the Navy, and then over the years was an FBI agent working on all sorts of cases. And then he just became a tremendous professor. Like he was one of those people that immediately, like, once he entered the classroom, he connected with the students. He had great stories, but he also had a lot of great knowledge about the
Mhm.
field of intelligence. And he conveyed that to students in a really compelling way. And somehow, as he was doing that, he found the time to mentor people like me, and other, colleagues working at the center. And so I think in a lot of ways, Carl really did, impact my life in a lot of ways. And also just getting to know him over the years, and having the opportunity to know an FBI agent so well. And then as my research focus shifted towards the FBI, he was one of my main, contacts of just saying, like, all right, here's what I'm working on. Like, can you tell me, like, what does an FBI agent do in this particular situation? Or what is an FBI agent thinking? Or, like, who in the Bureau would know the answer to this?
Mhm.
He knew all that. And he let me into that world. And he was very generous in, just making his knowledge available to everybody, not just me. And so I, you know, I have him to thank, because I think if he had not taken a chance on me and hired me, and also really, like, went out of his way to mentor me all those years, I know I wouldn't be in the position I'm in today.
Well, that's so heartwarming. I know. It makes a world of difference to have someone who, gives you advice and also kind of in your corner. It's like not just here's a list of things to do, but how do we get you, how do we help you on this journey and help you
Yeah.
kind of figure this out? Works
Yeah,
for you.
absolutely. And I think the best professors, like, see that, like, what you teach in the classroom is important, and you want to obviously do the best that you can there. But I think back to what I learned in college, and while I know I learned a lot, I can't recall particular lectures. Like, it's been 20 years since I went to college, so it's been a while. But I remember, the the help, the mentorship, the
Mhm.
guidance of particular teachers and
Mhm.
professors, like, have helped me. And yeah, it's made a huge difference.
So every career journey has its hurdles. Can you tell us kind of what some of the biggest obstacles you faced in your career were and how you overcame them?
Absolutely. Um, so I think it's shifted over the years. In the earliest years of my career, I think the biggest challenges that I had were, kind of trying just to understand the field of
Mhm.
intelligence, right? Like, I kind of started with a broad understanding, and then to take it to a level where I felt like I could publish fluently, and talk about it in a way that had any authority, took a lot of time and research. And so there were years years spent just reading every book I could get my hands on,
Mhm.
going to every conference that I could attend, saying yes to any opportunity that came my way, just because I saw every opportunity as a chance to learn more and to, make connections. Um, then when I came to the Citadel, in 2016, my career and my life had shifted quite a
Mhm.
bit at that point. So I had a almost 1 year old daughter at that point. And so I was trying to juggle being a mom, and also trying to really dig in and publish as a professor. In the last few years, I think things have changed again. Now that I'm working in an administrative role as department chair, I feel like the last 2 years have been um, lots of learning on my end. Maybe like to an extent that I had never learned so much in the past in such a short amount of time. Um, and it's been good, but also trying to balance like how do I function in this role as an administrator and also remain true to my love for researching and writing.
Mhm.
And so that's something that, when I think about like what are the struggles that are most resonating with me today, it's sort of that balance between the two. And again, I think like what I'm dealing with right now very much reflects like where I am in my career. And that's always kind of been the case that like the challenges evolve, right? As you evolve. And so I I will say it's always interesting. Like academia is interesting, the intelligence community is interesting, and I appreciate that about the field very much because I'm the sort of person that can very quickly get bored, and I
Mhm.
don't have time to get bored anymore because there's so much to do, and so I'm grateful for that. But yeah, if you were to kind of pin me down and say like what's the thing that you struggle with the most, I would absolutely say like I'm very much figuring out how to do that in real time.
I love your description of kind of how the challenges evolve as you evolve, because I think that really just hit the nail on the head. I think I used to think I was like, okay, well, when I hit, this point in my career with this job title or this thing, then, the challenges are over. And it is just such a great description you provided in terms of like, when you're in this role at this time in life with these things going on, the challenges may look like this. And then, kind of as you continue to grow and progress and the environment around you shifts or your responsibilities shift, that can be different. And it's just kind of really, that approach to a lifelong learning,
Yeah,
really help with that.
it really is. And one of the things that has really hit home for me in the last couple of years is I think in the early I would consider myself probably in the mid part of my career,
Mhm.
and in the early part of my career it was very much like, okay, when I finish law school
Yes.
I'm going to be happy.
Hmm.
And then it was, well, okay, but then when I get that first job I'm going to be, and then it was when I finish my PhD and when I get the professor and then when I get tenure. And like after a while you start to realize like, oh wow, it really is like, it sounds cheesy, but like I'm starting to see what people mean when they talk about it's really about the journey,
Hmm.
because you have this sense that like once you make it to the next big goal, like you're going to be there. And the surprise that life brings is that you're not there. It just brings like a whole new like set of problems and things to learn, and you just set new goals and it begins all over again. And so that's been something that has really hit home with me in the last couple of years is, I'm a very like forward thinking, let's make a 5-year plan kind of person. But I'm also trying to really just kind of also embrace the moment that I'm in, knowing that, there's always going to be something else to pursue. There's always going to be new problems on the horizon. And I think that's part of how people are able to do things over the long run, to see it as a marathon and not a sprint, because it's easy to get burned out in both intelligence and academia. It's so easy to like run yourself ragged and then like you're sitting there like, why am I even doing this? And do I want to keep doing it? And I love what I do. I feel lucky to be doing what I'm doing. I I deeply appreciate, the fact that I have these opportunities. So like, how do I stay in this? How do I stay engaged? How do I keep doing this in the long run, and not burn out is something that, I think about a lot these days.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, Melissa. So, what new developments around intelligence are you most excited about now?
Yeah. Um, so that's an interesting question, because I think we're kind of in a scary
Mhm,
time, right, in history, and I think there's a lot that, when I think about the future, there's a lot of uncertainty among everybody, and then also it's hard not to separate the last like 6 months from just it's a tough time to be in the federal government. I'll
yeah.
put it that way. Like
Yeah.
going to conferences
Mhm,
the last few months and seeing colleagues who work in the intelligence community who
mhm,
I've known for 15, 16
mhm,
years, um, who are worried about the future of their jobs. That's been really hard to see, and it feels like in a lot of ways things have shifted quite
mhm,
a bit in the last 6 months or so. But I think there are some really exciting things. The first is that I am so lucky that I'm around students who are like up and coming,
mhm,
because even when things are, in terms of like what's going on in the world, things are feeling like kind of scary or
mhm,
uncertain. That's when I really like want to focus on, okay, well, but here are these 20-year-olds and they're going to enter this world, and like right now today they're showing up and they're learning so that they can be the best version of themselves. And I find that hugely promising, right? Like, I think sometimes, especially like the older I get, it's kind of easy to be a little bit cynical.
yeah.
And so these students are really helpful because it's like, all right, there's another generation around the corner and they bring a lot of good things and they have all the right, excitement and, readiness to serve. And so I find that really exciting, just thinking about like what these kids are going to be doing in 5 or 10 years. The other thing that I think is really exciting is I think AI is really shifting a
Mhm,
lot in the world right now. And from the perspective of a researcher and an academic, I find that really exciting. I like to
mhm,
think about like how can you generate prompts in an LLM that will help you be a better analyst,
mhm,
because so much of my career has been spent on talking about and researching and teaching like how we become better analysts. And so I do see so many promises with chat gpt or whatever llm people are using to in a lot of ways improve our
mhm.
ability as people to be better thinkers, and so that is quite exciting.
Yeah, technology has really reshaped a lot of kind of the defense and national security sector. I love your kind of insights as to how it's improving it. I think we tend to, and maybe this is just human nature, we tend to focus on like, what we're losing with these technological developments, whether it's, jobs or, technology replacing kind of those automatable tasks.
Mhm.
Um, and so really appreciate your emphasis on kind of how, and really, your insights into how you're seeing that potentially improve, the effectiveness that we can use to enhance security.
Yeah, I've been kind of nerding out lately, um just kind of playing around with LLMs and asking different things like, can you generate an ACH for me on this? Can you red team from this perspective?
Yeah.
Can you look at patterns in history and tell me what's
Mhm.
missing? And so, what I've really appreciated about that is I like interrogating things. I think that's why I went to law school in the first place, because I did, moot court and mock trial in high school and college. And that was the one part of law school that I actually really enjoyed, was the
Mhm.
trial part in classes or interning for attorneys and watching them in trial. And so I started treating LLMs as if I'm like cross-examining them. Like, let me see, what do you know about this? And like, let me poke all the holes and then ask you to poke all the holes in my thinking. And so it's really like, it's supercharged in some ways my ability to analyze and to like bring original thought that wasn't even
Mhm.
possible a year ago.
Mhm.
And so I get pretty excited about that. I think we're going to figure out some really cool ways to use it, that makes us better and that ultimately, provides better intelligence products on down the line.
Oh, I love the description of cross-examining LLMs.
Right?
You're helping improve them, Melissa. You're making them more accurate.
Thanks. I mean, I was talking to a colleague about this yesterday because I mean, gosh, AI is like infused in everything we're doing
Mhm.
right now. I mean, it's like from a college perspective, it's like,
Oh,
well, how
yeah,
do are the students ever going to write a paper again?
yeah.
And then we organized a war game back in April where we worked with AI people from Silicon Valley, and we brought them together with DC people, and it was just a really eye-opening experience. And I felt like it kind of opened a new world, at least to me in my eyes. And so, that's kind of been something that we talk about a lot, like among the faculty in our department, is like, all right, this is an amazing tool. So
Mhm.
like, how do we use it in the most effective ways possible? And right now it's very much trial and error. We're just like trying things out, seeing what works, sharing it, and going back to the drawing board again
Mhm.
and again.
So what do you think is kind of the most misunderstood by the public in terms of like about intelligence work? What do people get wrong, do you think?
Yeah. Um I think there are a lot of misconceptions. Probably, so I'll touch on two that I think people don't really understand. Um, One of my frustrations is and this came from writing Nixon's
Mhm.
FBI. I think that we tend to equate what the leadership of an organization is doing with an entire organization.
Mhm.
And that was something that became very apparent in my Watergate research. Was, one, you have like kind of the official FBI story coming out of headquarters. And that was what most people knew. But I was able to interview the case agents who were like
Mhm.
responding to the Watergate burglary that morning after it happened. And I found that very inspiring and very hopeful, because those agents were working at a time when the FBI was just really in a state of upheaval. J. Edgar Hoover, had recently passed away. He died 6 months before 6 weeks before the Watergate break-in happened. And he had been the director of the FBI for 48 years. And so Nixon named a new FBI director, L. Patrick Gray, who was from the Navy. That caused all sorts of internal
Mhm.
um, kind of pressure in headquarters. And also, Mark Felt was operating as Deep Throat, which we now know. But in talking to the agents, they were just doing their job every day. Like they
Mhm.
were so separate from what was going on with headquarters. They were not in the political struggles. They were
Mhm.
not, in the power struggles that
Mhm.
that existed there. They were just trying to get to the bottom of the case. And I think about that so many times because, I think there's something to be said about like an agency can appear one way
Mhm.
and the people doing the work are oftentimes just doing the work. Like they're focused on their cases, they're doing the best they can. And I think sometimes we forget that. I think sometimes we associate an entire agency with, how it's being viewed publicly.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that I think is really misunderstood about the intelligence community, and I don't mean this as a knock to the intelligence community at all, I think people overestimate what the intelligence community knows, right? Like
Mhm.
we talk about like surveillance and they know everything. And the truth is they don't know everything. And there's a lot of like blind spots that continue to be problems
Mhm.
and that I think is something that a lot of people that I talk to, just family members or people in the community that I know, like that's not what they're thinking about when they think about intelligence communities. I mean, I think we are very much seen as a country with an amazing intelligence community, and
Mhm.
it is an amazing intelligence community. um, but also like it's amazing because we put a lot of work into it, and
Mhm.
so that work becomes necessary, and that's why I just think that kind of that cycle of educating and training the right kind of people to go into intelligence who can do it with tenacity and integrity, is so important.
Yeah, it's a great appreciate your kind of it's like a lot of people have assumptions that the government the big brother there has all of this information. I now live in very rural Appalachia out in the mountains, and I had a neighbor the other day. He was telling me something. He was like filing for like a loan for his farm, and he's like, I don't know why I have to send this in to the federal government. They already track everything on my cell phone. They already know everything about me. And yeah, this was his assumption. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how this works. You might want to send your application in if you want to receive money for, your conservation there on the farm. But I thought it was kind of funny and but also enlightening to how the assumptions go. It's like, okay, well, here are the spooks, they track everything, and that's not how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there are people that would like that capability, but and again, that's when you dig into the historical record, you're like drowning in
Yeah.
in paper
Mhm.
and computer files, and there's
Mhm.
so much information, and like oftentimes so much of it is not relevant to like
Mhm.
what you actually need to know.
Mhm.
um so yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting problem to have when you have something that is as powerful as the
Mhm.
US intelligence community is, but then within that power, within its amazing access to information, is then a whole new set of problems. Like, okay, but now you have to like process and analyze all this stuff, and like, can you even do that? And, prior to now, the answer has sort of been not really. And so, again, kind of going back to your question earlier, when I think about like what's hopeful about
Mhm.
AI, is I think AI can help with some of that stuff of
Mhm.
just dealing with the overwhelm of finding the needle in the haystack. Um, but yeah, it's funny that your neighbor said that, and I have a good friend who works for the NSA, and that's something that he's stressed in the past, like stop thinking you're so important. Like, we don't sit there and like read your emails. We just don't, you know?
So, but on that note, what role does ethics play in intelligence work?
Yeah. Um, so I think ethics is absolutely fundamental to intelligence work. Intelligence work is ultimately uh, invasive, is ultimately empowering a government, maybe empowering certain people within the government to do certain things. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with actual people. And so, if we think about things that have happened in the past, um, a couple of years ago, I was working on a roundtable review of Beverly Gage, who's a professor at Yale, who wrote just a phenomenal biography of J. Edgar Hoover. And and so I was working with several scholars who have written on the FBI, and one of those scholars was Locke Johnson, who was a professor at University of Georgia, very famous in intelligence studies circles, a renowned historian of intelligence. And Locke Johnson kind of got his start as a staff member on the church committee. And so the church committee was the committee that was formed by the Senate after Watergate. And it was like 1975, 1976. The Senate was investigating, really for the first time in a very comprehensive way, what the intelligence community had done. And so that included covert operations that the CIA had run, that included things like COINTELPRO that the FBI had run. And I'll never forget Locke's review of Beverly Gage's book, because he could not read that book, read that, biography of Hoover, and not remember people that he interviewed while working for the church committee who had literally had their lives upended by things that the FBI had done to them as part of a larger operation. And I think about that a lot, in terms of the fact that we can think about this abstractly, but once you're drawn into an investigation, once the focus of the intelligence community is on you, it becomes a very different story. And that's the moment when we owe it to ourselves as Americans, and we owe it to ourselves as decent human beings to really uphold constitutional values, to make sure that, we're dotting every I, crossing every T, making sure that we're remembering that this is a democracy, and that part of that means that citizens, US persons, even people who aren't US citizens, we still acknowledge and value basic fundamental rights. And I think that that's critical. And I also think that, something that has been impressed on me over time is just how important that ethical framework is for like later in your career, because it's one thing to have a hypothetical conversation with college students about like, what would you do in this sticky ethical situation? We love to have conversations like that in academia. We love to throw out like some, you know, idiosyncratic scenario and then say, what would you do? And that's a fun, intellectual kind of conversation to have. It's another thing when you're, 10 years into your career, you're feeling not completely fulfilled by that career. You're feeling passed over for a promotion, or you're unhappy with the case that you're being assigned, or whatever. You're not loving the cards that life has dealt you, and you're working on something sensitive, and it's up to you to know your moral framework and to apply that. I think that's a much harder scenario. And I think that that's the thing that ultimately, at the end of the day, makes the US intelligence community different. That's why we're not China. That's why we're not
Mhm.
Russia, because we have people who uphold those values. And, I remember having conversations with FBI agents who had investigated Watergate. People like Angelo Lano, who was the lead case officer or case agent for that case. And there were so many issues with the Watergate investigation, so much happening at headquarters that quite honestly should not have been happening. And I'm picturing him recounting this for me and for other audiences, and just thinking like, this is the quiet, like, internal conversation that he had with himself decades ago
Mhm.
about like what to do in these moments where like the media isn't paying attention. He's not gaining any sort of notoriety from his boss, right? Like colleagues aren't praising him, but because he made the right decision, like he made a difference in history, and he can look back on his actions in those years and be proud of what he was doing amid a system that was falling apart. And you know to just kind of emphasize what he was doing, like talking to other people, talking to other case agents, talking to the attorney generals who were working with him. I mean, they all affirmed this, that Angie was who he claimed to be. He was a hot-headed Italian. He spoke his mind. But at the end of the day, like he was true to his values, and it made all the difference, at least from my perspective, on that Watergate case. Like he was the nexus of ethics
Mhm.
for the FBI in what was otherwise a really tumultuous situation. And so I guess, just to answer your question one more time, I would just say I think that there's really nothing that's more important than a person's ethics, working cases that carry such gravity.
Yeah. Melissa, what are your top concerns, about national security? Like, kind of what keeps you up at night? I know it's both the sector and then many of the processes and with technology are a lot's changing right now.
Huh.
But what are your kind of top concerns?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. One of the things that I think a lot about lately is I think the last few years, really from COVID on, have exposed in a lot of ways how institutions that we collectively used to have a lot of faith in,
Mhm.
maybe didn't function in the way that most people expected them to on all sides of the political spectrum. I just think we've kind of lost faith in a lot of institutions. And when I think about what's happening with AI, when I think about the money, the um, the brilliance, the brain power that is currently like nested in Silicon Valley
Mhm.
or in, AI type companies, not necessarily in Silicon Valley. I worry that at some point the I worry that the federal government is going to have to justify its existence in its current state.
Mhm.
And I think about that because, when we were hosting a war game in April, almost 2 months ago, um, we had a lunch conversation with practitioners from the intelligence community, like senior level practitioners. We had a former uh, director of operations for CIA who was part of this conversation, you know, two-star generals, that sort of thing. Um, and then we had CEOs and founders from tech companies. And we just kind of had like a no holds bar, like, what do you want to know about each other? And one of the things that came out of that conversation was just the difference in cultures between DC and Silicon Valley. That Silicon Valley is very fast, break things, apologize later. You know, one of the Silicon Valley people even posed a question to the government people. He said, you know, how long on average does it take for you to clear somebody for a security
Mhm.
clearance? All right. And so the former directorate of operations answers, you know, 1 to 2 years.
Mhm.
Right. And you can see all the Silicon Valley people just like kind of sitting there like, okay, that's crazy. And so one of the government people asked the counter question, like, what's the fastest, if you interviewed a candidate that you really liked and you wanted to hire them, what's the fastest that you could get them hired? And a co-founder said 9 days.
Mhm.
And they were just like, you know, the crazy thing is, like, no one in our field would work for us if they had to wait 2 years to come.
Mhm.
We'd lose them. We'd lose them to another company. And I think about things like that. I think about, you know, just kind of the red tape, the
Mhm.
the steadiness that has been a good thing, I think, for the government, but is now maybe becoming a liability in a world that's faster and
Mhm.
faster. You know, like, once you have an AI lab that has access to more information, better information, and more money than a lot of governments in the world, we're just
Mhm.
in a different playing field.
Mhm.
And that's the world that I think we're entering. And I think that's the world that not enough people are thinking about.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example on kind of time to get a clearance. It's just, and also for innovation to occur, you do have to break things. You do have to learn the limits. You do have to try things that don't work out so you can figure out what does. And it's just a great description of kind of the chasm there between, the bureaucracy that stabilized DC and the federal government can kind of become a choke point
Mhm.
in terms of innovation and in this fast-paced world, which is very different than even in Nixon's era in terms of
Right.
information flow. And
And you know, I was moderating a panel for a defense conference back in December, and you know, we had multiple people from the military that were talking about kind of the procurement process for getting like AI into the military, and it was not like a great conversation because it was just so complicated, and it was like, okay, by the time that all the paperwork is filled out and everything's approved, like the software is already like 2 generations
yeah.
behind. And that's just, you know, we've put all of these choke points in place
Mhm.
to protect intelligence.
Right.
And that worked back in the day when, you know, only states held valuable intelligence and it was all classified. But
Mhm.
now we live in a world where so much intelligence is available via open source.
Mhm.
And also, you know, I would argue that major companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, OpenAI have amounts of information that would rival anything that the intelligence community has. And so to operate in this world, it's kind of like, well, how do you stay relevant? Josh Corbell is a faculty member at the National Intelligence University,
Mhm.
and he's written some on this topic of like the intelligence community facing irrelevance, and he compares it to Kodak, the company, right?
Yeah.
Like during like the heyday of film cameras, Kodak was the leading film company, right? But then everything switched to digital, and
Mhm.
Kodak, like for whatever reason, didn't feel the need to lead that innovation,
Mhm.
and they end up declaring bankruptcy. And it's like this would have been unthinkable in the 80s or even the
Mhm.
90s. And yet today, if I were to ask my kids, like, what's a Kodak moment, they would have no idea what I'm talking about, like no framework whatsoever. And I always think about that when, I think about like, how do you keep a system relevant? I think about that warning from Josh of like, what is the intelligence community's Kodak moment, and
Mhm.
how are they going to, face that in a more
Mhm.
effective way than Kodak did?
Yeah, that's a great example. So what career advice do you have for the next generation of professionals interested in pursuing a career in intelligence?
Mm, I love that question. I get this question from students all the time. And, you know, I don't even know. I mentioned this at our AI lunch when we were talking to the Silicon Valley people. I'm like at the point in my career where I don't know what the world's gonna I don't know what the job feels gonna look like a year from now, let alone 5 years from now. So it's really unprecedented where we are right now. And I think because of that, more than ever, I think it's important for students to, or for, aspiring professionals to really understand their passions, and then why they're passionate about that and what they bring to the table. Because, I'm thinking over the years of students I've known who have come into intelligence because their parents wanted them to do it. You would be so
Mhm.
surprised. Like when parents see there's like an intelligence program at a college, it's like all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I should have done that. And like my kid should do that. And so, like, sometimes, and you can tell almost immediately because like the parents are asking like all the good questions in like the advising meetings, and the students are just like checked out. Or sometimes I'll see students who are like, I should learn Chinese. I,
Mhm.
I love these students because I was totally like this.
Mhm.
There was a time where I was like, well, the intelligence community, like they want Arabic speakers. Maybe I
Mhm.
should like learn Arabic. Okay,
Mhm.
well, like then I went to an Arabic class and I was like, oh my gosh, I have like no idea what I just tried to get into. Um, and so, one of the things that I tell students is like, do not learn something that you think
Mhm.
people are going to want you to know, or that you think is going to be relevant 5 years from now, because now we're at the point where the world's changing so fast. Like, you have no idea what the world's going to want 5 years from now. And the last thing that you want to be doing is, you know, taking accounting classes if you don't like math, or
Mhm.
taking a language class in a language that like you don't love. And truth be told, you cannot learn Chinese unless you love Chinese and you really want to learn Chinese. Like, you can have good intentions, but to do a lot of the things that the intelligence community wants, to do them well, to do them in a way that stands out, you've got to love what you're doing. And so I think, what is so exciting to me about the intelligence community is that there's room for everybody, no
Mhm.
matter what their skill set is. I mean, even, skills that you wouldn't think would be relevant to intelligence, there's usually a way to find a nexus. And so, really leaning into those skills that excite you, that, make you want to get up in the morning and go do this work because you feel passionate about it, not because you feel like this is the work that the agency would want you to do so that you can have that job. I think is really important. And I stress that to students a lot, to use the time in college to really figure out like, what do you bring as a person?
Mhm.
Because I'm a big believer that like everybody brings something special to the table. And if you can figure out what it is that, excites you, that you're going to want to work towards, then that's the magic where you can become really good at it and you can
Mhm.
distinguish yourself. And I think that's a healthier approach to that than just, trying to be what you think people want you to be, but you actually have no real passion for. AKA my 3 years in law school. So I have like personal experience.
Great advice. I think it's so tempting to be like, all right, how do I fit in this little box here that I think I should fit in because, there's a program that spells this all out. Or, in 2024, they were hiring for that, which to your point, a lot's changed in a matter of really just months. So,
Yeah, it's crazy. And sometimes when I am talking to students, like, oh my goodness, a few months ago, um I had a graduate student that I was talking with, and we have a lot of graduate students in our program who are, um, they're looking to shift careers
Mhm.
into the intelligence community. And he had all of these skills that you would not necessarily associate with intelligence. He was
Mm.
highly skilled in photography,
Oh,
um,
wow.
in radio. I mean, he just had some really interesting things, and that only became apparent after we talked a while.
Yeah.
And he mentioned some things, and I was like, "Can you tell me more about that?" And he did, and I was like, "That why isn't that on your resume?" Like
Mhm.
that's so interesting. It's
Yeah.
so relevant, and like I I can't believe you're not like leading with this and your like
Yeah.
objective statement on a resume, because sometimes that's one of those magical moments where you're talking to a student and they realize like, oh wait, you mean like the intelligence community would be interested in the fact that like I'm a genius at physics? And you're like, yes, they would love that. Let's lead with that. So I think sometimes people just don't even know the things that they bring to the table
Mhm.
already, and so that's why I think understanding what's going on in the world and just trying to say, okay, like what do I bring to the table that like maybe most people don't bring, can be a really powerful way to kind of find your place.
So looking forward, what developments are you most hopeful about in terms of kind of the future of, intelligence and national security?
Yeah. Um, I think again, going back to kind of what is it that AI can help us see that we
Mhm.
haven't been able to see before. The other thing that I am really kind of interested in studying a little bit further, and just haven't had the chance to yet. After the 9/11 Commission, there was a huge emphasis, as we talked about earlier, in improving analysis.
Mhm.
And I was privy to a lot of those conversations happening through like conferences and academic circles about like how do we think better. And one of the things that we have been teaching, that I've been teaching, and that I know the intelligence community has been teaching, is that we have so many cognitive biases.
Mhm.
And I won't get into those because it's kind of like its own discussion. But basically, like if I had to summarize the way that the intelligence community has sort of viewed analysis over the last 40 years or so, it's that like our brains are working against us through all of these cognitive biases. We make poor assumptions, we misperceive things, we're terrible at gauging statistics, at judging certain situations. And so the focus of the intelligence community has very much been how do we mitigate these cognitive biases? But I see this shift happening in cognitive sciences, where there's a newfound appreciation for things like intuition, and maybe saying that cognitive biases that we thought were impediments in the past um, might not be the terrible things that we thought they were. And so I think that we're definitely entering this new threshold of understanding how the brain works, of
Mhm.
understanding how we make analytic judgments. And I'm excited to see how we can incorporate that into analysis moving forward. I think that there are a lot of things still left to learn in that field about like how our brains work, and I find that very exciting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love how you described it. Our brains are working against us. That's a great description for cognitive biases.
Yeah. Yeah, and so maybe we'll like be able to give our brains more credit than we have been. Like maybe they're not always working against us. I don't know. We'll see where the research goes, but there's some interesting work that I think some people in psychology are kind of on the cutting edge of right now.
That's fascinating. Oh, any final words or of advice or kind of thoughts for the audience?
I don't really have anything else to say. It has been a pleasure talking with you, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. And also, I think it's really heartening to know that there are listeners or viewers out there who care about these issues, and particularly right now, I think it's important that when we have those shared passions, we find each other and are able to talk about that, because I I believe very strongly in the work that the US intelligence community is doing. I think that, of course, the intelligence community has made its fair share of mistakes, but overall, I think the world is a better, safer, more just place because of the intelligence community. And I think it's important that, even in times when it's difficult to have conversations about things, that we continue to have them. So thank you so much for hosting me.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being on here. You provided us so much insight into kind of the critical nature of intelligence and the concept of national security, and really broke it down in ways that resonate. And I know that's a very complex topic, so I really appreciate you doing that.
My pleasure. I enjoy talking about this. So this has been fun.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spheres with Hannah Becker. We hope today's conversation challenged your perspectives and sparked new curiosity about the future of national security. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.